Today, we'd like to remember a case that shocked Italy during World War II. In the small town of Correggio, elderly women began to mysteriously disappear. The townspeople were stunned to discover that the culprit was Leonarda Cianciulli, a seemingly respectable woman, wife, and mother of 4. This cruel woman not only killed her innocent victims, but also made soap from their bodies and allegedly baked cookies and cakes from their blood and ground bones. But who was this woman, and why did she commit such heinous crimes? Welcome to a journey filled with horror and dreadful events. Let's travel to Correggio, a small town in the Italian province of Reggio Emilia, about 350 kilometers from Rome. Correggio is a place seldom visited by tourists, who mainly come to see the monument to the great Renaissance painter Antonio Allegri, known as Antonio da Correggio, because he was born and began his artistic career in this small town. Few remember that in the last century, Correggio gained notoriety again, not because of an artist or musician, but due to a serial killer. In this quiet place surrounded by fields, several horrific crimes occurred in 1939-1940, which became known throughout Italy. This was a time of turmoil for Italy. Just a few months earlier, in September 1939, World War II had begun. Italy, led by dictator Mussolini, was an ally of Germany, which had invaded Poland and was preparing for further battles for dominance in Europe. In Italy, tension was mounting. Some supported Italy's official entry into the war, declaring it against Britain and France, and sending Italian soldiers to fight alongside the Germans. Those few who opposed the war kept silent. Italy was under a fascist regime that brutally suppressed anyone who dared to oppose Mussolini and his alliance with Hitler. It was in this atmosphere of sanctioned violence that this story began. On December 18, 1939, 73-year-old Faustina Setti, a resident of Correggio known by her nickname Robiti, suddenly announced she was leaving town. At the pier on Via Roma, she bid farewell to her acquaintances. Her neighbor, Ida Lazzaretti, approached her. Faustina reminded Ida that she was leaving Correggio today. "Why?" asked Ida. Faustina said she was going to visit her cousin in Suzzara for the Christmas holidays. Ida didn't believe her, but didn't press further. Faustina told another neighbor, "Yes, I'm leaving to visit relatives in Suzzara. If I'm happy there, I might never return." What surprised people wasn't that Faustina, known as Robiti, was leaving. She was a simple woman who couldn't read or write, devoted most of her time to prayer, and had never seen much of the world. Her victims faced unbearable trials. Faustina had dyed her gray hair black and put on red lipstick, which was unheard of. She mentioned she sold her house. "Yes, I sold the house because I want to spend the last few years of my life well. I sold the bed linens and furniture too. Signor Pansardi and Signor Gioia bought them." To some, she said she wasn't going to her cousin but to the Riviera because she needed more sunshine at her age. The residents of Correggio couldn't understand what had happened to Faustina. To her niece Rosa, she said, "Yes, I'm going to Suzzara, but not to my cousin. I'm going to marry a widower from Nicosia who has a 16-year-old son." Later, Artiglia, a maid from Signora Cianciulli's house, who was also known as Signora Pansardi by marriage, stopped by to summon Faustina, saying her mistress urgently wanted to see her. They met on the landing, and Artiglia later said Faustina looked like a harlequin with her dyed hair and bright lipstick. Suddenly, Faustina started crying. She remembered selling her house to Signora Cianciulli and realized she would never return. "Who knows what my Arrigo would have said if he had seen me like this," she whispered. Arrigo, her son, had died of cancer last year at just 33. It was a devastating blow for Faustina. After his death, she grew closer to Leonarda Cianciulli. It was Leonarda who helped Faustina find a new husband, whom Faustina had yet to meet, through astrology. Leonarda was almost never wrong in her hobby. The new husband was supposed to meet Faustina in Pola on the island of Sardinia. But this had to be kept secret, so Faustina told people she was going to her cousin's. Rumor had it that Leonarda first took 30,000 lire from her friend for matchmaking services and then persuaded her to sell the house and all its contents cheaply. That morning, Faustina had collected the money from the bank and counted it. She had nearly 32,000 lire left, enough to find happiness in Sardinia. At 8:30 a.m., a neighbor saw Francesca leave her house in a black coat, heading towards 11 Sorso Cavour. On the night of September 4th to 5th, Francesca Soavi packed her clothes, put a few hundred lire in her pocket, and planned to visit Leonarda Cianciulli before leaving. According to Francesca, Cianciulli was the only one who understood her. Leonarda had helped in every way, buying many of Francesca's belongings and speeding up the sale process. That night, Francesca hardly slept. On the morning of September 5th, she spent time with her former student, Marta, and then said goodbye, mentioning she had to stop by the post office. "But we will see each other again," she assured Marta. At 8:30 a.m., a neighbor saw Francesca leave her house in a black coat, heading towards 11 Corsicovour. Marta began to worry when Francesca didn't return as promised. Around 3 p.m., Marta and her brother Antonio went to Leonarda Cianciulli's home. They were greeted by Cianciulli's new maid, Nellie, who led them to her mistress. Leonarda claimed she hadn't seen Francesca that day and had no idea what might have happened to her. Determined to trace Francesca's steps, Marta retraced the suspected path, checked the post office, and asked around. She became convinced that Francesca had indeed visited Cianciulli that morning. But why had Leonarda lied? The perpetrator realized they could be caught. The locals weren't foolish. They could piece together the facts. So the killer decided to mislead those worried about Francesca's fate. A few weeks later, Marta received a postcard that read, "Hello, sending kisses to those who always remember you." Marta doubted it was from Francesca. But a month later, she received a letter from Paula, and this time she couldn't mistake her teacher's handwriting, which reassured her. Others who knew Francesca also received postcards. Francesca wrote that wherever she was in good health, traveling more than she ever had in her life. Had another tragedy not occurred, these messages might have been enough to satisfy everyone. But too little time had passed for the worries in Correggio to settle. One of the town's main celebrities was the opera singer Virginia Cacioppo, though some called her a former singer, enviously noting her past fame. Many thought she was wealthy, having performed abroad frequently. In reality, Virginia had been living modestly for the past 2 years. She no longer performed. In 1924, in Buenos Aires, she married violinist Alfredo Fanti at the age of 42. The duo toured South America, Egypt, and Tuscany. While Virginia wasn't a great singer, she had a knack for being striking and leaving a strong impression. By 1940, she was no longer the opera diva who captivated audiences across continents. Her husband had died, and she had settled in Italy with only photographs left of her former glory. She dreamed of returning to her hometown of Menfi but remained in Correggio. Her money was dwindling, and each year she felt increasingly lonely. At some point, Virginia befriended Leonarda Cianciulli. She confided in Leonarda about her dreams of finding a well-paying and light job, as she was approaching 60. Cianciulli told her she could get her a position as a secretary for an influential man in Florence. Confident that Virginia, with her socialite past, would make a great impression, Leonarda assured her of the opportunity. Virginia, excited by this chance, agreed to Leonarda's conditions. She wouldn't tell anyone about it, and would write letters to her friends in advance, to be mailed just before she left for Florence. On November 29th, Virginia went to a hair salon and asked for an excellent styling. "I'm leaving, I need to look splendid," she said. Later, around 2 p.m., she visited her landlady, Lucia Broccaioli, and asked, "Do you have a revolver I could borrow?" Lucia, puzzled, asked why she needed a gun. "I'm going traveling," Virginia replied, offering no further explanation. In a conversation with a friend, she let slip that Leonarda Cianciulli was helping her. She had a sister in Florence, a very wealthy one, from whom she could receive at least 4,000 lire a month. Cianciulli said that Virginia would need a lot of money to start, but that wouldn't be a problem for her. The main thing was to get settled. After that, she could rejoin high society, perhaps be invited to sing in the opera again, or even find a millionaire to marry her. "I'm leaving on Monday, December 2nd, Virginia told her friend Santina Secchi. But on Saturday, November 30th, Virginia met Santina again at Mass around 7:30 a.m. and told her that Cianciulli had received an urgent telegram from Florence. Apparently, there were so many applicants for the secretary position that Virginia needed to leave immediately to secure the job. She needed to leave that very day. Santina tried to dissuade her, but to no avail. Virginia left the San Quirino church before the Mass ended. At 9:30 a.m., her namesake, Virginia, met her. The singer asked for help carrying a fur coat and a small bundle of money to 11 Corsa Cavour, Leonarda Cianciulli's address. Then the singer went to say goodbye to her landlady but felt uneasy and told her, "If I don't return in 8 days and don't send word, start an investigation." At Cianciulli's house, she was met by Signora Cigarini, who had the coat and money. Virginia took her belongings and said, "If I become rich, I will bring you a nice gift when I return." With these words, she entered 11 Sorso Cavour. No one saw her alive again. In a small town, how could it go unnoticed that women disappeared after entering 11 Sorso Cavour? Was it just a coincidence that all the missing women trusted Leonarda Cianciulli and sought her advice? The Correggio police were slow to start an investigation. It needed someone determined and interested in finding out the truth. That person was Alberta Fanti, Virginia Cacioppo's sister-in-law. Alberta didn't believe that Virginia could leave without notifying her, a close relative and good friend. Described as resilient and intelligent, Alberta was a primary school teacher, known in her family as a policeman for her investigative nature. On December 26, 1940, Alberta Fanti went to the police station and demanded to meet with the local chief, Federico Scagliarini. She explained how she had been searching everywhere for Virginia, even traveling to San Martino, but no one knew what had happened to the opera singer. Scagliarini dismissed her concerns, calling it all women's gossip. Alberta insisted that Leonarda Cianciulli, who had befriended all 3 missing women, was very suspicious and likely involved. Getting nowhere with the local police, Alberta and her brothers, Augusto and Enzio, went to the Reggio police station on January 17, 1941, to voice their suspicions about Leonarda Cianciulli again. Alberta had gathered witnesses and traced the belongings sold by the missing women, and Cianciulli's name kept coming up. It was also evident that all the missing women were elderly and defenseless, convinced to leave town. Realizing the police didn't believe her, Alberta produced a list of government bonds with serial numbers totaling 31,500 lire, which belonged to Virginia. "If you find these bonds, you will find their owner," she said. A week later, on January 26, 1941, a search was conducted at 11 Sorso Cavour. Although nothing incriminating was found in Leonarda Cianciulli's house, Alberta's gathered testimonies were confirmed. In January 1941, Cianciulli had given Francesca Soavi's dress for alterations, and it was recognized. One witness also testified that Cianciulli had a black coat that belonged to one of the missing women. The local police could no longer ignore the disappearance of the 3 women. An official investigation was opened, which triggered a wave of anonymous letters with information. Cianciulli denied the accusations, showing letters from the missing women and claiming they owed her money. She argued that she would not kill her debtors. Despite witness testimonies placing her with the missing women, there was no physical evidence to arrest Cianciulli for murder. The police decided to detain her temporarily on suspicion. Legally, there was nothing more they could do. On March 1, 1941, Leonarda Cianciulli was arrested. On March 3, her maid, Nella Baragazzi, was also taken into custody. The police searched the house on Sorso Cavour again but found nothing. On March 17th, Cianciulli was transferred to Reggio Emilia prison. They expected her to testify, but she refused to answer any questions and did not admit guilt. But who was Leonarda Cianciulli? How much did the residents of Correggio know about her? Everyone remembered when she arrived in town. It was November 3rd, 1930. Her family had moved from Macedonia after an earthquake destroyed their home. They wanted a fresh start, away from the painful memories. Leonarda's husband, Raffaele Pansardi, was 37 years old at the time, and she was 36. They brought 3 children with them, 10-year-old Giuseppe, 9-year-old Bernardo, and 6-year-old Biagio. They settled in a brick building at 11 Sorso Cavour. Raffaele quickly found a job as a minor clerk, earning 850 lire a month, a modest income, even for a quiet place like Correggio. Leonarda was pregnant and initially rarely left the house, fearing for her child. New acquaintances in Correggio described her as a short woman, about 1.5 meters tall, and stout. Despite being 36 and pregnant with her 15th child, she appeared strong. Locals gossiped about how only 3 of her 14 previous children had survived. Such talk didn't seem to bother Leonarda. Her face was perpetually marked with an expression of disdain for the world around her. No one dared confront her, as her contemptuous demeanor could be intimidating. Leonarda dreamed of having a 4th child, perhaps a girl, but in February 1931, she lost the baby. It was another blow for her. Later, she would say that there was a flaw within her, preventing children from being born. Only the strongest could survive her womb. Leonarda was unhappy in her marriage. She married Raffaele Pansardi in 1917 at the age of 23. Her mother opposed the marriage, but Leonarda ran away. Since then, she had changed both outwardly and inwardly. Raffaele couldn't provide for the family, and money was often scarce. Leonarda started a small business, reselling clothes and furniture, which is why she bought belongings from the missing women. She also offered services as a fortune teller and astrologer. Additionally, she was known as an excellent cook who took orders for baked goods. Leonarda was involved in financial ventures, including taking loans to afford a tutor for her sons and a maid. Acquaintances noted that she would do anything for her children. She was almost despotic as a mother. Gaston Nedamagnan, a friend of her son's, recalled, "She never left her children alone for a moment. I remember we, the neighborhood kids, were playing with her sons, and she threatened us, 'Be careful with my boys or I'll wrap your guts around your necks.' She was a woman I wouldn't want as a mother." Leonarda tried to get pregnant again. In 1933, she succeeded, but in February 1934, she lost the baby again. She didn't give up, and on July 17, 1937, she finally had a daughter, whom she named Norma. After this, Leonarda became more anxious, and neighbors noticed that the family seemed to be living beyond their means. Raffaele Pansardi gradually turned to alcohol. Meanwhile, Leonarda began spending more, frequently visiting the hairdresser, presenting an image of prosperity. She spent around 500–600 lire a month on her appearance alone. Much money was also spent on the younger children. Norma attended a kindergarten at a convent, and Biagio was in middle school. Bernardo served in the army, and Giuseppe studied literature at the University of Milan and was an assistant tutor at the national boarding school Rinaldo Corso in Correggio. Of course, Leonarda Cianciulli and her family were not the most respected residents of Correggio. But to imagine they were involved in the disappearances, possibly even murders, soon became a reality. In March 1941, the officer responsible for the investigation, named Serrao, sent the list of Virginia Cacioppo's bonds, provided by her relative Alberta Fanti, to the Bank of Italy. On March 28th, he received a reply. The bank found one of the missing bonds worth 1,000 lire, sold on December 4th, 1940. The man who sold it had also sold other securities. This man was Fratini Donadelmo, a parish priest from Correggio and the local treasurer. During interrogation, the priest explained that the bonds were not his but belonged to someone else, a certain Serovara from Correggio. Serovara Spinabelli stated that the bonds were given to him by Signora Cianciulli, who asked him to exchange them. The next day, Leonarda was asked how she came to possess Virginia's missing bonds. She replied, "They were sold to me by Colonel Goby. It was in the park. Virginia was with us but just watched." From the beginning, the police suspected that Leonarda's eldest son, Giuseppe, was involved in the disappearances. Although there was little evidence to detain him, he was taken into custody on April 5, 1941. On April 6th, the police searched Cianciulli's house again, and this time they discovered that no one had previously searched the attic. In the attic, the police found 2 axes, a 27-centimeter hammer, a 48-centimeter saw, and a large pot. They also seized a container with cement remnants. A search was also conducted at the home of Cianciulli's maid, Nella Baragazzi. Upon discovering the clothes and bags of the missing women, Nella broke down and said she was ready to testify. She had been very afraid of Giuseppe, who had threatened her. Now that Giuseppe was arrested, Nella needed to explain herself to the police. Thanks to her account and the testimony of another maid, Artilia Diaci, the police were able to reconstruct the 3 crimes committed by Leonarda Cianciulli. On December 18, 1939, at 10:30 a.m., Artiglia Diaci escorted Faustina Setti to Sorso Cavour. In the house, besides Leonarda, was her son Giuseppe. Leonarda greeted Faustina and sent the maid to the butcher. Artiglia recounted this during an interrogation on November 14, 1941. According to Artiglia, she didn't even enter the house. She returned from the butcher 20 minutes later to find only Leonarda at home, looking flushed and agitated. Faustina Setti was murdered during the 20 minutes when the maid was not at home. The killing occurred in the kitchen, and it's unclear if Cianciulli's son assisted her. Faustina was first drugged with wine laced with sleeping pills and then struck on the neck with an axe. Her body was then moved to the attic. When the maid returned, she didn't notice any blood on the floor, likely because it had been cleaned up, or as Cianciulli later claimed, she struck Faustina with the blunt side of the axe. On December 19th, nearly a day after the murder, Cianciulli sent Artiglia on new errands. Cianciulli was alone at home. It was morning, and the children had gone to school. Artiglia left around 10 a.m., planning to stay out until noon, but returned half an hour later because she was cold and wanted to put on something warm. She rang the doorbell several times, but her mistress did not answer. Artiglia kept ringing until Cianciulli finally shouted from the nursery window, telling her to leave. According to Artiglia, Cianciulli had a white towel draped over her shoulders. At that moment, Cianciulli was dismembering Faustina Setti's body, and the towel was meant to conceal any blood splatters from being seen from the street. Cianciulli dismembered the body in the bathroom and a closet, where blood traces were later found. It took her about 3 hours. Artiglia returned around noon as instructed, but Cianciulli hadn't finished moving the remains to the attic. She would do this while the maid was in the bathroom. Giuseppe returned a few hours later, followed by the rest of the family. Together, mother and son lit a fire and put a pot on it. Soon, Artiglia noticed a nauseating smell. She later recounted, "Cianciulli and her son Giuseppe were talking, but I couldn't understand what they were saying. Then they both approached the pot, which Leonarda opened. At some point, a large amount of foam came out of the pot. The pot covering the stove almost fell on Leonarda's little daughter, who began to cry. I ran to the pot from the sink. The foam boiled over for about 15 minutes. When it hit the hot stove, it smelled terribly of burning. The smell was so strong that Giuseppe opened all the windows. At 9 in the evening, Giuseppe said goodbye to the family, returning to the boarding school, while Cianciulli continued to cook something. The maid put Leonarda's daughter to bed and then went home. She returned to work at 7:30 a.m. and saw the pot in the dark room. Cianciulli called her to show the soap she had made. I looked inside and saw a grayish-green mass. It filled about half the pot, she said. Later, when the maid went shopping and returned, Cianciulli told her that the soap didn't turn out well, and she had thrown it away. What Cianciulli didn't use for soap, including the victim's head, was likely taken away by either her or Giuseppe, and buried in an unknown location. Cianciulli later claimed she baked cakes with her victim's blood and served them to her family and guests, but the maid's testimony didn't mention this. Artiglia Diaci soon left Cianciulli's employ, and the family hired a new maid, Nella Baragazzi. Nella, a 25-year-old, was more efficient and less curious than her predecessor. On Thursday, September 5, 1940, Nella took Leonarda's daughter Norma to the kindergarten run by nuns. When she returned home, she found Francesca Soavi, with whom Leonarda had recently become friends. Nella didn't know if Giuseppe was home. Leonarda seemed uneasy with her return and quickly sent Nella on an errand, eager to get her out of the house. When Nella returned about 15 minutes later, Francesca was gone. In that brief time, Leonarda had killed Francesca with an axe and moved her body to the attic. However, she forgot to remove Francesca's shoes. When Nella found them, she was puzzled and asked how Francesca could have left without them. Cianciulli explained that Francesca had changed into more comfortable rubber-soled shoes because these had hurt her feet. The maid found it very strange but decided not to ask any further questions. Later, she said, "I don't remember if the pot was boiled that day or not. I don't remember." Leonarda Cianciulli could easily dispose of the body. Nella was a part-time maid and thus absent for about 10 hours a day. Giuseppe had traveled with his brother Biagio to Gualtieri, which later led to suspicions that he knew about the plan to kill Francesca Soavi and was creating an alibi. Another son, Bernardo, was at military training in Vicenza. Norma, the youngest daughter, was too young to testify against her mother and slept soundly through the night, not hearing anything. Leonarda disposed of the body at night. She boiled parts of it to make soap and discarded the rest. She had to act quickly to ensure Nella didn't notice the smell of the decomposing body. Nella, who had occasionally gone to the attic, never noticed anything suspicious. Leonarda's last murder occurred on Saturday, November 30th, 1940. Nella arrived around 7:30 a.m. as usual. Leonarda was already up and instructed her to answer the door if anyone rang. She was expecting a guest. At 9:35 a.m., the doorbell rang. It was the former opera singer, Virginia Cacioppo. Leonarda sent Nella on errands, instructing her not to return before noon. Nella obeyed and did some laundry at her own home, returning at noon as instructed. The first thing she noticed was that Leonarda had placed a pot on the stove. During the 2 hours that the maid was away, Cianciulli managed to kill Virginia. Just like her previous victims, she first drugged her with a sleeping potion, then moved her body, dismembered it, and set it up to make soap. She was in a hurry. Initially, she planned to kill Virginia on Monday to avoid leaving the body over the weekend when her family would be home. However, Virginia's anxiety forced her to act faster. That day, Nella was surprised. The pot was so heavy. How did her mistress manage it alone? There was no one else in the house. "Did you see Cacioppo? She came to see me this morning," Leonarda asked the maid. Then she added, "She came to say goodbye before leaving. She left in a car that was waiting for her by the road." Nella objected, saying she hadn't seen any car by the road. When she asked what was cooking in the pot, Leonarda replied that she was making tomato paste and warned Nella not to get too close because the jars might explode. At 2:30 p.m., Nella was sent out on errands again. When she returned at 5 p.m., Biagio, Leonarda's son, was already home, unaware of anything unusual. Leonarda continued to cook. Nella left again to pick up Norma from the nuns and put the girl to bed. She checked the time. It was late, around 10 p.m. During these days, Nella stayed overnight at the house. When she went to bed, the pot was still boiling on the stove, but when she got up at 6 a.m., the pot and its contents were gone. The attic was locked, which was unusual. Leonarda explained that she hid fruits there to keep Biagio from eating them. Virginia Cacioppo's remains were still in the attic, and Leonarda couldn't dispose of them. Nella noticed that her mistress had gotten up before her. The kitchen was clean except for the stove, which was stained with something greasy. On December 1st, Nella found soap bars in the house, presumably made by her mistress. However, she noticed that no one used this soap. They continued buying soap from the hardware store. Meanwhile, Leonarda tried to get rid of the smell of the decomposing body still in the attic. She used lime, but it didn't help. She risked dragging body parts from the attic to the bathroom, having already separated the bones from the rest. On December 4th, Nella noticed a foul smell, like rotten meat, and strange activity in the bathroom. Several times, Cianciulli flushed something from a jug she brought down from the attic, and the stench spread throughout the house. Finally, on December 5th, it was over. Giuseppe left the house with a bundle and returned without it. Leonarda removed the lock from the attic, and Nella, now able to access it, found nothing. The police later suspected that Giuseppe disposed of the bodies, likely packing Faustina Setti's and Francesca Soavi's remains in a suitcase he took to Milan twice a month for his studies. No one would have suspected him if not for the investigation. The investigation into the 3 murders was the most challenging and complex case the Correggio police had ever faced. Cianciulli tried to cover her tracks by involving as many outsiders as possible, thinking it would divert suspicion from her. Instead, it brought forth witnesses whose testimonies proved her guilt. The police found Virginia Cacioppo's jewelry, bracelet, gold earrings, and a delicate gold necklace, spattered with her blood and hidden inside a small concrete heart. This unusual discovery was in a metal box along with money and cheap trinkets. The box was given for safekeeping to Lucia Iprati, the housekeeper of Don Frattini, the priest who received the box from Cianciulli, supposedly unaware of its contents. On April 17th, Cianciulli was summoned for questioning again. Initially, she refused to speak but agreed when the police told her that her son Giuseppe had been arrested and could be charged with the murders. Cianciulli tried to shift the blame to Saravara Spinabelli, from whom the police had recovered Virginia Cacioppo's securities. According to Spinabelli, Leonarda had given him these papers for exchange. Cianciulli claimed that Spinabelli wanted to rob Virginia, killed her with an axe, dismembered her in the bathroom, and then fled Leonarda's house in slippers and a bathrobe while she was allegedly not there. She claimed that she returned home later, found her friend's dismembered body, and out of fear for herself, hid it in the attic. This was her story. The pot was later found in Cianciulli's house. The police didn't believe her, but detained Spinabelli until all circumstances were clarified. Finally, under threat to her son, Cianciulli confessed. Yes, she killed Virginia Cacioppo, boiled the body parts in a pot, and made soap from the fat. On April 18th, after intense questioning, Cianciulli confessed to the murder of Faustina Setti. This time, she said she killed Setti by strangling her after she lost consciousness from opium-laced coffee. However, on April 20th, she admitted that Setti also died from an axe blow. I boiled her the same day with about 5 kilograms of caustic soda, she said. I extinguished the fire at 11 p.m., got up at 5 a.m., and found everything ready. The body in the pot had dissolved into a whitish mass. She claimed that the intestines and bones were destroyed in another pot and the remains mixed with garbage. She shredded the clothes and threw them into the Porto Reggio Canal. But all the money went with Spinabelli, she kept repeating. He took all the money. I didn't see a single lira from it. The testimony of her former maid, Artiglia Diasci, confirmed Leonarda's words. Yes, she had seen the pot where the body was boiled and the soap it had become. Look at the good soap I made, Leonarda said to her maid, before allegedly flushing it down the toilet. She asked Artiglia if she knew any wealthy, lonely women to befriend, but Artiglia always said no. Artiglia suspected something was wrong. In her prison cell, the memories slowly drove her mad. Guards reported that she screamed every night, "Kill that murderer! Kill her!" In May 1941, she was hospitalized in a psychiatric facility and never fully recovered. The police doubted that Cianciulli didn't profit from her victims' murders. Although the family was considered poor, they lived beyond their means. Leonarda lied about receiving money from distant relatives. Raffaele, her husband, claimed she had no money of her own and only a modest dowry. The children wore ill-fitting clothes, and there often wasn't enough food. Yet Raphael smoked expensive cigarettes and recently bought a radio for 2,000 lire, despite his salary being only 850 lire for a family of 6. Nothing has changed in our family's conditions, he claimed, although he had been living apart, working in Genoa. Before he left, he couldn't help but notice something strange was going on at home. According to police estimates, Cianciulli could have received around 103,000 lire from her victims, primarily in securities, equivalent to about 72,000 euros today. Realizing she couldn't avoid punishment, Leonarda began to feign insanity. During new interrogations, she claimed her first murder was to save her children from death. In September 1939, her children were ill, especially little Norma. A friend, Cheesemaker Spinabelli advised her to seek help from a high priest. The astral entity told her she needed to make offerings, including many cakes, a coat, fur, 2 souls, and 200,000 lyre. At that time, she denied killing Francesca Soavi, speaking only of Faustina Setti and Virginia Cacioppo as the 2 souls sacrificed to the priest. This contradicted her story about Spinabelli, who supposedly took the money, since the priest required both souls and money. Therefore, Leonarda had to admit Spinabelli had nothing to do with it. "I committed the crimes I confessed to alone," she said, adding that Francesca Soavi's murder was not on her conscience. "How did I commit these crimes? I can't sleep at night. If I had a revolver, I'd shoot myself. I swear it wasn't for the money." She claimed to have epilepsy and said the deaths of her children had greatly affected her. Her family members also called her insane. "I believe my wife is not mentally sound," Raphael said. After numerous childbirths, Leonarda was never properly examined, and I was afraid of receiving bad news. Besides, her illnesses were usually brief. Cianciulli confessed to killing Francesca Soavi only at the end of June. But who sent the postcards in the name of the deceased? She admitted it was her son, Giuseppe, who didn't know their true purpose. Giuseppe also confessed, saying, "Now that I know what happened, my mother's request might seem strange, but at the time I had no suspicions." Investigators had Giuseppe's alibi, making it unlikely that he helped his mother with the murders, but he clearly assisted in disposing of the bodies. Giuseppe was the only one who knew everything about Leonarda Cianciulli. She often told acquaintances, "Giuseppe and I are 2 bodies, but 1 soul." Giuseppe himself said, "There are no secrets between my mother and me." Fearing that her son might be implicated as an accomplice, Cianciulli started accusing others, like her second-floor neighbor Delia Gioia, with whom she previously had a good relationship. Cianciulli accused Delia of knowing about the murders and wanting a share of the furniture bought from Faustina Setti. Delia had to clear her name, repeatedly telling the police she knew nothing about the murders or the other arrested individuals. Eventually, she was released. In the summer of 1941, police finally inspected the cesspit in Cianciulli's garden and found something resembling a piece of a skull. They also discovered a dental prosthesis with 14 teeth. Cianciulli later claimed this prosthesis was hers, but there was no evidence to support her claim. Leonarda Cianciulli was sent for a psychiatric evaluation on August 26, 1941. She continued to claim that her mad brain was to blame for everything. Renowned psychiatrist Filippo Saporito, who was the head of the psychiatric hospital for criminals in Aversa, Naples, was tasked with determining her mental state. If found sane, Cianciulli could be sentenced to death. If declared insane, she would be sent to a psychiatric hospital. In May, before the evaluation, Cianciulli had attempted suicide by swallowing a piece of her corset bone. Professor Saporito found her in a state of extreme nervous agitation. Although she had previously insisted on her insanity, she now told the psychiatrist, "No, I am not insane. I am a great criminal, one of the most terrifying. I want to be punished. Neither my son, my husband, nor my maid knew anything. I did it all alone." Saporito asked her to describe her life and suggested she write her memoirs, a request that would later become a significant part of her trial. Cianciulli agreed and titled her memoir, An Embittered Soul's Notebook. It spanned 748 pages, possibly making it the longest memoir written by a criminal. In it, Leonarda poetically and passionately recounted her life from birth. After the materials were published, doubts arose about whether she had written everything herself, as the text was filled with cultural and biblical references and quotes from Italian classics, which seemed beyond her known educational background. Researchers believed she might have fabricated many details to appear more impressive. However, Professor Saporito believed in the sincerity of the text. Cianciulli completed her memoirs in March 1943. The memoirs detailed that Leonarda was born into a good family. Her mother, as described in the memoirs, was an orphaned noblewoman who lived in a convent school run by nuns. At 14, she was kidnapped by a young nobleman, Salvatore Dinolfi, who fell in love with her at first sight. After Salvatore died of pneumonia, Leonarda's mother married Mariano Cianciulli and had 6 children, with Leonarda being the youngest. They lived in a well-to-do household with a maid and good food. Leonarda loved school. Things were good until 1909, when her father died. She was just 15 years old. The memoirs also described her travels to America, escapes, numerous suitors, and kind nuns in monasteries. Researchers are convinced that much of what Leonarda Cianciulli wrote in her memoirs were romantic fantasies of a young woman, not a reflection of reality. Leonarda described an encounter with a gypsy who told her, "You must have many children, but they will all die. 4 or 5 of your children must die as adults or in war." The gypsy also said, "I see prison on your right hand and a psychiatric hospital on your left." In 1917, Leonarda married Raphael Pensardi. In her memoirs, she claimed to have given her dowry to the poor. Her romance with Raphael was described with great enthusiasm. "Ah, it was a sweet, pure, angelic kiss, which the secret heart harp made burst from all the hidden strings of my being." Despite many pregnancies, her children kept dying, reinforcing her belief in the gypsy's curse. Her husband, seeing her despair, threatened to lock her in an asylum. From then on, she created a dual personality: Nerina, the calm wife, and Nardina, the suffering mother. Leonarda asked the gypsy for advice again, who told her she needed to go to prison to appease death. Leonarda had indeed been in prison 3 times before her marriage. Once in 1912 for theft, serving 3 days. In 1920, she was sentenced to 6 months and a 600 lira fine for fraud. And in 1927, she served 10 months for another fraud. Despite losing 13 children, she fiercely loved and protected the surviving ones. To save them, she allegedly pulled out her teeth, burned them, and offered the ashes to the Virgin Mary. She even threw herself into cold rivers as a sacrifice to higher powers. The crisis came in 1939 when war broke out, and her eldest sons were deemed fit for conscription. Remembering the gypsy's prophecy, Leonarda turned to old books, seeking a way to break the curse. She read about Spartan women who killed innocents to appease an evil god, and decided that Faustina Seti, Francesca Soavi, and Virginia Cacioppo would be sacrificed to save her sons. Leonarda also reiterated the story of baking cakes with her victims' blood, which she fed to her family. In her memoirs, Cianciulli provided a detailed, almost minute-by-minute account of how she first killed, then dismembered, and boiled her victims' remains. Much of it was far from reality. For instance, she claimed that Francesca Soavi begged to be sacrificed, pleading for a painless death and asking for a single blow that she wouldn't notice. According to Leonarda, they kissed and reaffirmed their vows. She prepared coffee and some tinctures for Francesca, and as soon as the axe struck, the martyr died instantly. Leonarda then described how she cut the body into 9 pieces in the sink, with Francesca allegedly urging her to be careful. Professor Saporito, based on 25 notebooks written by Leonarda, concluded that she was incapable of understanding or recognizing her actions at the time of the crimes. He declared her a public danger, noting that she mixed blood with chocolate and spices to bake cakes for her family and added powdered bones to cake batter. This conclusion did not satisfy prosecutor Giorgio, who argued that in 1939-1940, none of Cianciulli's children were in immediate danger of being sent to the front lines, nor were there any witnesses to her previously committing insane acts in the name of divine mercy. Despite Professor Saporito's verdict, Leonarda Cianciulli was not spared from trial and was charged with 3 counts of premeditated murder, 3 counts of aggravated kidnapping, and 3 counts of corpse destruction. She was brought to court as a criminal fully aware of her actions. The trial of Leonarda Cianciulli was delayed for a long time due to the war. When the Allied forces landed in Italy in September 1943, Cianciulli was in a psychiatric hospital in Aversa. The judicial authorities found themselves in territory controlled by the Anglo-American forces, while Reggio Emilia, where the trial was to be held, was under German control. As a result, the case against Cianciulli was suspended due to the wartime circumstances. Giuseppe, her son, was spared from participating in the war and awaited his fate in prison. The war ended in 1945 with Italy's defeat and the execution of dictator Mussolini by Italian partisans. The judicial system in Italy only resumed functionality in 1946. The sensational case of the soap maker was revisited, and the first hearing was scheduled for June 12, 1946. Cianciulli dressed in a black dress for the trial. She was placed in a cage and described as an exalted woman, very pale, with only a few teeth remaining. She pleaded for her innocent son Giuseppe to be released, offering to accept any punishment herself. "Douse me in gasoline, set me on fire, let the crowd lynch me, but release my innocent son," she cried. Giuseppe remained calm, seemingly confident that he would be acquitted. Cianciulli reiterated what she had described in her memoirs. "It's impossible that you acted alone," the judge stated. "I repeat, I was alone, and it's on my conscience," she insisted. The audience shouted back, "You have no conscience!" "I am a great Italian, a prolific mother," she declared, only to be met with laughter. Finally, she admitted, "Yes, I am a shameless murderer, the Soap-Maker of Correggio. My son is a martyr. Today I would put on a show. I would burst out of this cage, tear you all to pieces. I would be a lioness, as I always have been." On July 20th, 1946, the verdict was delivered. The jury found Leonarda Cianciulli guilty on all counts, sentencing her to 30 years in prison and 3 years in a psychiatric institution. She was declared mentally unfit. Her son, Giuseppe, for whom she fought tirelessly, was fully acquitted due to lack of evidence. Cianciulli cried out, "Blessed be God, long live the law. People of Reggio, forgive me, and I forgive you." Mother and son, sharing a cell, embraced. 3 hours later, Giuseppe was released from prison, having spent about 5 years in custody. Following these events, the Cianciulli family decided to leave Correggio. The locals remained suspicious of Giuseppe, convinced he had helped his mother dispose of the bodies. The family's subsequent fate is unknown, but the house at 11 Sorso Cavour, where they lived, still stands. Leonarda's apartment was divided into 3 smaller apartments. For years, rumors persisted in Correggio about soap made from human bodies and bone powder used in Leonarda's baking. Leonarda Cianciulli died in the Pozzuoli prison on October 15, 1970, from a cerebral hemorrhage. She was 76 years old. Her letters to Giuseppe, written from prison, have been preserved. In them, she wrote, "Peppino, I can no longer call you my dear son. I feel that I am infecting you. What are you guilty of? Only of being my children. Oh God, why didn't I die? I saw you and repented. Kiss Norma for me. Tear up all my photographs and leave me alone with my self-disgust. I don't want to stain and shame the family name again. I ruined myself on December 1st, 1939. Now, let's move on to the mental state of Cianciulli. But before we discuss the psychiatric status of today's patient, let's consider the social significance of this story. It's important to understand that every story and case should be evaluated in the context of its time and era. People's belief in various mythological concepts turned our subject into a metaphorical and mythological character. I emphasize that there is still a museum where you can see all the items from the crime scene, including the soap-making equipment and kitchen utensils used to make the infamous cakes. At the end of the tour, you can buy soap or cookies with Cianciulli's likeness. Some might find this sacrilegious, and I agree. But this is how people around the world smooth out the psychological edges. This whole narrative around this frail, fragile woman turns into a farce, and society continues to perpetuate it. Let's not forget, this all happened in Italy. Italians are very demonstrative, not in the sense of being hysterical psychopaths, but it's part of their culture. They speak in loud tones, emotionally, with strong gestures. For those encountering Italians for the first time, it might seem like there's something wrong with their mental state, but it's simply a cultural trait and doesn't indicate mental illness. Therefore, many of the outbursts and emotions observed during the trial do not necessarily characterize our patient today as mentally ill or insane. The diagnosis of mental retardation is highly questionable, as it appears that she was trying to feign insanity. Of course, the early 20th century was fertile ground for mystification. the rise of fortune tellers, tarot cards, and predictions of the future. I wouldn't dismiss her claims about a prophecy predicting the deaths of many of her children, specifically 13 children. This number is significant, and if we recall various philosophical works and mythological reflections, when a prophecy is made, the person or hero often resists it so desperately that it ultimately comes true. It seems our subject was trying to tell us such a story. What we know for sure is that she was the youngest child. This often means being the center of the family's attention, as the youngest typically receive more focus and care. The older children are usually reprimanded for not taking care of the younger ones, and the youngest often get the largest portions. This likely contributed to her developing a strong sense of her own importance. However, this doesn't mean she was narcissistic, as it wouldn't be fair to accuse her of that. The intense emotions and demonstrative behavior observed in the courtroom are part of Italian culture, characterized by loud speech, emotional expressions, and strong gestures. This cultural trait can sometimes be mistaken for signs of mental instability, but it is merely a reflection of their communicative style. The attempts to portray herself as mentally unfit and the calculated mysticism in her story suggest a strategic move to avoid the harshest punishments. Leonarda's final years were spent in prison, where she continued to claim responsibility for her actions, often in dramatic terms, but maintained that her son Giuseppe was innocent. Her letters from prison reflect a complex mix of guilt, remorse, and a continued sense of maternal protectiveness. Leonarda Cianciulli was very sensitive and attentive to her men. Given that Italy is a patriarchal country where men hold a central position, it's not surprising. We often hear legends about how Italian mothers care for their sons, and Leonarda grew up with this awareness. This cultural context supports the argument that she didn't suffer from any mental disorder, but was fully conscious of her actions. Her crimes show a clear sense of awareness and intent, and she skillfully tried to manipulate and hide her deeds. Let's examine how she disposed of the bodies. It's evident that her primary motivation was financial gain. The mythological layer suggesting she performed pagan rituals seems dubious, but it's up to you to believe it or not. What's important is that she treated her victims like livestock raised for slaughter. Anyone familiar with livestock farming knows that everything must be utilized. Intestines for sausage casings, hides for rugs and covers, bones and fat for soap and gelatin, and of course, meat. Leonarda didn't just try to get rid of the bodies, but aimed to put them to use by making soap and cakes. This practical approach adds a ritualistic element to the consumption of blood. Did her family know the origin of the soap and cakes? One of the maids testified that no one used the soap, implying that the family might have been aware of its true nature. In summary, Leonarda Cianciulli's actions reflect a calculated and conscious effort to benefit financially from her crimes, while the supposed ritualistic elements serve as a secondary, perhaps exaggerated, narrative. Her family's potential awareness of her deeds further complicates the perception of her mental state, suggesting a deliberate cover-up rather than insanity. Further supporting the hypothesis that she was sane, Leonarda Cianciulli changed maids because it became increasingly difficult to explain her actions to each new one. She invented various excuses, such as boiling jars of tomato paste and hiding fruit in the closet. When she was arrested, she tried to pin everything on the cheesemaker, and initially, it was such a logical hypothesis that he was even detained. She also tried to accuse her neighbor, and for a while, people believed it. But due to her personality defects, all her clever manipulations failed. This is a clear characteristic of people with personality disorders. Some might argue against my words, pointing out that she screamed during the trial that she had no brain and was the greatest criminal. Let me remind you again, she was Italian. If you've ever been among Italians, you know they say such things, either positively or negatively. Additionally, in prison, she attempted a severe and deliberate suicide by swallowing a corset bone. If you've never seen a corset bone, I recommend you Google it. It's not a seed, it's a rather bulky metal piece. The fact that she attempted this suicide consciously shows she was trying to stop the process and clear her son's name, expecting that if she died, all charges would be dropped. But it didn't work out. Why did the psychiatrist claim she was insane? You know, malingerers are difficult patients. Psychiatrists without extensive experience always have problems with them. Now, regarding the diagnosis, was she really mentally retarded? Of course not. More likely, and what seems to be the most fitting diagnosis, is obsessive-compulsive personality disorder. This is a persistent pattern of behavior characterized by a preoccupation with orderliness, perfectionism, and control over oneself, others, and situations. Leonarda actively controlled her son, her family, and wouldn't let anyone interfere, taking all the blame upon herself. All her crimes show a clear fixation on details, rules, schedules, routines, and various lists, which is typical of such personalities. She aimed to create the perfect family, but this relentless pursuit of an unattainable ideal often prevents people with this disorder from completing tasks, leading to frequent depressive episodes. Such personality disorders are also marked by excessive scrupulousness and inflexibility regarding ethical and moral issues and values. This is evident in her approach to the murders. She didn't see her victims as people but as livestock, with her main goal being to provide for her family, particularly her children. In court, she fought like a tigress to assert that her son knew nothing and was innocent. While this is questionable, without any alternative data, we must work with what we have. Her personality disorder is also characterized by an unwillingness to delegate authority or work with others, unless they comply with her way of doing things. This is evident in her manipulative abilities, such as having her son send letters to give the impression that the victims were still alive. Such individuals are also very rigid and stubborn. Additionally, they exhibit a frugal approach to expenses for both themselves and others, viewing money as something to be saved for future calamities. Given the era in which she committed her crimes, marked by the sudden onset of war, it's understandable why she might hoard resources. Thus, I am nearly 98% confident in my hypothesis that she had obsessive-compulsive personality disorder, OCPD. However, I welcome your comments and opinions on this matter. This concludes the terrifying story of an ordinary-seeming Italian woman who committed 3 murders. Was she insane or calculating? Some believe she was driven by illness and fear for her children, while others think she was a skilled liar and manipulator, committing crimes solely for profit. Only Leonarda Cianciulli knew the true answer.